Everybody, this is Draymond. Today we have a nice 8-game college basketball slate. We have a pretty interesting slate here. Before I get started, though, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Really helps the channel a lot. So let's go ahead and get into it here. So the players that I have here are my favorite plays of this entire slate. So do keep that in mind. I just kind of wanted to set them in here. I also would include Hunter Dickinson, but I couldn't add another forward there, so just mentioning that here. But anyhow, these are my favorite plays for the slate. I will get into this. I'm going to break down each game real quick, though. Let's go ahead and start with this slate here. So we have 8 games, and there's 2 games that have totals outside the 4 to 6 point spread, and then we have a couple games that have higher totals than the rest of the games. Well, one high total and one low total. The high total is going to be the Gonzaga-Kansas game at 151 points, and the low total is Washington State and Iowa State at just 129 points. All the games outside of that Arizona and Illinois game are going to be 4 to 6 point spreads, with both those games being 9.5 and 10 point spreads, respectively. So let's go ahead and get into the individual games themselves. We'll start with Dayton and Arizona. Now, this game does feature a pretty tight game here, though. I do think Arizona is the better team. However, Dayton has the best player in Deron Holmes, and he is one of my favorite plays on the slate if they can keep it close. He has big time upside, and he needs 37 fantasy points to pay off. I think he can definitely do that in this one, though it is a risky matchup as Arizona is a pretty good defensive team. I do think Arizona might get ahead of this in a little bit early, and that would definitely limit his potential. But he's definitely somebody to consider. Not a whole lot to like from Arizona, though, today, because I felt like they're a little bit overpriced for this matchup. And so while you do have guys like Love and Keyshawn Johnson that have some upside, they're relatively risky today and not must plays by any stretch of imagination. But Nate Santos also for Dayton, if you think they can keep it close, would have some upside in this one. Moving to Gonzaga and Kansas. Now, this is an interesting game from a fantasy perspective, as Gonzaga doesn't play very many guys. They just play their guys basically straight all the minutes for the most part, their starters. And that does give some upside to Nimhard and Watson, who are both guys that I have here as decent plays on the slate. One thing I do like about Nimhard is that he's been very consistent throughout the season, and that gives him a lot of utility here. He didn't have the best game against McNeasy, but they got ahead pretty early, so he didn't have to do as much. But he does have that scoring potential and that assist upside, which gives him a nice little boost here. I think he's a little pricey, but I think he's going to be a good value for this slate, and he's got some upside, especially with Kansas lacking some people. Watson is also interesting because he has a good matchup here. And while it is a rough game here against Hunter Dickinson, he's had some big games throughout the year, and he definitely has some upside in this matchup. He's probably a little bit riskier than Nimhard, but he definitely has some potential. I also think Nolan Hickman has some upside, but he's definitely kind of risky. And then Graham Ike, he would be my fourth favorite player from the team, but he carries a lot of risk as he's a little bit overpriced here. Moving at Kansas, though, Dickinson obviously gets the big boost here with McCullers out, and that is going to make him a viable play on the slate. He is extremely expensive, and if you think Gonzaga can hang tough here, he might be a riskier play. But he is clearly the guy that has the most upside fantasy-wise on this entire slate. I do think he, is avoidable though because of his price, with there not being a super ton amount of value. The other guy I do think has some utility today is Johnny Murphy. He always has played well this season whenever McCullers was out, and this is going to give him a lot of potential here. In fact, I think he'll probably be in my lineups for the most part, so do keep that in mind. But I think he's a viable option as while he is priced up, he's not as priced up as much as I expected him to be. Moving into the Michigan State North Carolina game, this is going to be a interesting game because Michigan State is kind of going to be the underdog here. The spread is actually tighter than I expected at the 4 point spread, but I think UNC will probably be able to handle Michigan State here. But obviously, Izzo's a great coach, and he can create good things. If you believe in Michigan State at all, then Hoggard would be your best bet. But I do think everybody's a little bit pricey here for this one, and I think they're gonna try to slow the game down some, and that's gonna be kind of not great for fantasy. But if we look at North Carolina here, Baycott, Davis, and Ingram all have utility today, and I think Ingram is probably my favorite play from the team as he's got some good upside here, though he does have that low floor, which he's had the last few games. I think he has some opportunity here to have a big one, but he definitely carries some risk because his prices come down. That helps. Baycott has actually been really good lately, and that gives him a lot of potential here as this is kind of the situation that he likes. And so, if you think North Carolina can handle this game, then I think he'll be a good play on the slate as well. Looking at the Washington State Iowa State game, this does feature a group of guys I actually like pretty good. I felt like everybody was fairly priced in this game. There's some risk here, but I think a lot of these guys are basically just GPP plays at this point. The reason it's some riskier is that this is the slowdown game of the slate with just 129-point total. And that does make it more difficult for fantasy perspectives. But Isaac Jones and Jalen Wells are for Washington State. Both have some utility here. They're kind of contrarian plays tonight, but they do have upside. And then Isaiah Watts has some potential as he played well in the first game. I don't necessarily know how his minutes are going to go, but he's gotten an increase in minutes lately, and that does give him some potential here. Uh, I think that he, has that upside if he can get the minutes. So, especially at this price, that helps a lot. Looking at Iowa State, Lipsy and Gilbert both have the best upside on this in this game here, but they do carry some risk as well, as they're a little bit pricey for a slowdown game. I don't necessarily think they're gonna like 5x or anything, but they could give you what you need to pay off your and help you get where you want to go. I think mostly when it comes to the mid range plays in this game, and that would be uh, Lipsy, Gilbert, Jones, and Wells. I think these are the type of guys that if you have a utility spot left and just that right amount of money, then this is probably where you're going to want to look for them. Looking at the Oakland North Carolina State game, we feature the two lowest uh, two sub 10 seed teams to play here. Now, they have been priced up as a result, but there are some options here, and that is going to make this somewhat interesting. We're going to look at first Oakland here, where all their guys are priced up, but Rocket Watts is actually still cheap, and he absolutely had a amazing game for himself against Kentucky, despite the fact that he had teammates that did more things. He was just kind of a pest, and he managed a pretty good fantasy game. I do think that he's going to have some opportunity to have some minutes in this one, and that's definitely going to give him some upside. But he definitely carries some risk. Um, we're also going to notice that Golik's price has popped up uh, here. Now he hit 10 threes against Kentucky. He's going to come out shooting them again. So he's definitely got that capability. He does carry some risk though, because if he doesn't hit, 5 or 6 of them, then his fantasy output is probably relatively low. His price is high, so um, he's not cheap anymore, which definitely harms his potential. Same with Townsend, the prices come up, though not as much as uh, Golik is. Uh, Golik has had that price come up. I do think Townsend is actually pretty safe for this game still, especially if Oakland can keep it close. DQ Cole is also in play in this one, so to keep that in mind here. As for NC State, DJ Horn and is probably the best option on the team. Uh, Not a whole lot to love for this team. I mean, the matchup is good because it should be an up-tempo game, but I do think that Horn is probably the safest play from the team. You could look at some other guys like Diarra or Middlebrooks, but they definitely carry that GPP slash contrarian feel, and it's kind of avoidable to me at this point, at least. Looking at Texas and Tennessee, this game does feature a pretty good total, which I really expect this game to be kind of rough. Disu is the best player for uh, for uh, Texas as he's played throughout the season really solid. But his price is actually pretty good for this game. I do think that this could be a really tight game though as we get late in the game, and that could have some upside for a guy like Disu. But if we look at Tennessee, Don Connect obviously is going to have to show up and have a monster game here for Tennessee to win this one. I do think he has that opportunity though, and should be able to play well here. I also like Edu, but he definitely carries some risk um, as he has been inconsistent throughout the season. But I do think he has some potential in this one, uh, and he's priced decently fairly here. Then we're going to look at the next game here in Duquesne and Illinois. Now, this game does feature an interesting situation as Illinois could kind of blow this game out, and that's sort of what I think is going to happen. Obviously, Jimmy Clark and Day Grant have some potential, but they are priced up some, and that does draw some risk there. But Terrence Shannon Jr. has been playing absolutely monster basketball lately, and I look for that to continue here. I don't think that Duquesne has anything that can really keep them from doing that. It is a quasi tempo game, but I do think that Terrence Shannon is probably the play of this particular game, and that gives him a lot of upside. Moving into the Oregon and Creighton game, this is a game that I don't love a whole lot from because these guys are pretty I mean, Oregon's going to be a tough team for Creighton, but Creighton does play the style of ball that actually does benefit them here. Dante is a guy that I think is just a great option on this slate. He's been playing very well, and his price is still pretty good, and so that gives him a lot of upside in this one. As for Creighton, I think that they do, they play their starters for the most part most of the game, and that does give Alexander, Cockbrenner, and Schreierman a lot of potential. But they are pricey, and this matchup is not the most ideal. I think the guards have more potential though, and so that's kind of what I would go with if I run with anybody on that team. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.